She wasn't causing a scene. She didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, polite and silent. Yet, just minutes later, security was called. The reason? Because she was a black woman who walked into the first-class area at Crestview Airport in the U.S. Surrounded by tailored suits and high-end leather luggage, there was a woman in a simple gray sweater, pulling a small suitcase behind her, head slightly bowed. Every single pair of eyes turned to look at her. An employee whispered, a manager raised an eyebrow, a panic button was pressed. She didn't know she was being watched, or maybe she did, but she stayed quiet. Then, in full view of dozens of passengers, 2 security officers showed up, eyes suspicious, hands tied on their radios. But there was something they didn't know, something only one person in that entire airport was aware of. The moment she reached for her phone, everything began to change. This isn't just a story about skin color. It's the moment an entire system was forced to stop and wait to see what would happen next. The atmosphere in the VIP boarding zone at Crestview Airport had its own rhythms, low, quiet, and tightly controlled, like a private club. Amara Thompson stood in the priority line, one hand holding the handle of a worn Navy suitcase, the other gripping her phone, displaying an e-ticket. She was dressed simply, a light gray turtleneck sweater, neatly pressed slacks, and low leather shoes. No designer handbags, no flashy jewelry. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, her expression calm, her eyes clear. But it was that very calmness that made her stand out among people clad in tailored suits, wearing Chanel perfume, and scrolling through the latest smartphones. She didn't say a word, didn't make a move, and yet every pair of eyes seemed to land on her, one by one. No one said anything, but the silence was heavy, like an invisible glass wall separating her from the rest of the line. At the security podium, Margaret Hensley, senior aviation supervisor, was watching. She was large, her flushed skin peeking from the stiff, tight suit she wore like armor. Her eyes didn't scan the whole area, they landed on one exact spot. The woman of color standing quietly at the back of the priority line. Margaret frowned, her eyes flicking from the suitcase to the shoes to the phone in Amara's hand. Nothing was wrong, but nothing matched her idea of what a first-class passenger should look like, either. She tilted her head and pressed the button on the walkie clipped to her wrist. Delta 7. Check the subject at the end of the priority line. Possible entry into the wrong zone. Her voice was flat, not loud, not soft, like she had just spotted a suspicious bag on the floor. Amara hadn't said a word, but to Margaret, she already looked like a problem that needed to be removed. Amara stepped up to the screening counter, her shoes making barely a sound on the gleaming floor. Still, no one said a word. Margaret Hensley stood stiffly behind the desk, eyes darting from the screen in front of her to the woman approaching. Amara held out her phone. The electronic ticket was clear, first class, Zone 1. No scan was needed, no verification required. Margaret glanced at it for less than a second and, in that flat tone she'd used to dismiss hundreds of improper guests before, said, "You may be in the wrong line. Economy is over there." No greeting, no barcode check, no questions asked. Amara's face didn't change. She simply lifted her chin slightly, looked Margaret dead in the eye, and replied, "I know exactly where I'm standing." For a moment, their eyes locked a silent standoff. Margaret hesitated for half a second, then smiled, a cold smile like something from behind a freezer door. She didn't argue. Instead, she tilted her head toward a nearby staff member and gave a small flick of the chin, an unspoken order. "Handle it." The young employee stepped forward, reaching out as if to guide Amara away. Amara hadn't even moved yet when Margaret leaned in, just enough to whisper a few words under her breath, not loud, but loud enough for the nearby staff and Amara to hear. "Another reward point upgrade. Thinks having a seat means sitting next to someone who actually belongs here." No one answered, no one reacted, but Amara heard it clear as day. Still, she didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't pull out ID, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked down at the screen, at the booking code only visible to elite strategic members of the Horizon Group. What Margaret didn't know was that the ticket Amara held, unavailable to the public, was issued by the Executive Command Office, bearing a signature found only on internal board-level decisions. And the woman Margaret was trying to remove from the priority lane was the same person who, just yesterday, signed the final approval on a $3.8 billion deal that saved this airline from a complete buyout. Without Amara's nod, Sky Vista Airlines wouldn't even exist under that name today. But maybe the most terrifying thing wasn't that Amara knew exactly who she was. It was that everyone here had already decided she couldn't possibly be anyone at all. Amara followed the two security officers into a small, isolated room, one of those spaces where passengers are invited for private questioning. A sign on the door was printed in 3 languages: Security Courtesy Room, for internal use only. The room was nearly silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioner and the cold, white light shining directly onto the metal table in the center. One of the guards, a man in his 40s, sat across from Amara, flipping open a notebook. Full name: Amara Thompson. Destination: business flight to Seattle. Purpose of travel: to conduct an internal review of a strategic partner. Her answers were crisp, open, but offered nothing extra. He scribbled something, then suddenly looked up, voice flat and unblinking. If it's business, why are you dressed so plainly? Amara tilted her head slightly, her gaze calm, steady. Are you asking if my clothing makes me unqualified? No reply. The second officer, a female guard, reached into Amara's fabric tote bag. Inside, she found only a laptop, a handwritten notebook, and a sealed envelope closed with red wax, bearing the official emblem of Horizon Group. The guard picked it up, inspecting it like she expected to find something illegal. What's this? Work documents. Can we open it? Amara didn't raise her voice, but every word landed like steel against the thick, unjust air. If you want to read that, you'll need a lawyer and a court order. The male officer froze for a beat. His female colleague cleared her throat softly, a quiet cue to back off. Amara took the envelope, slid it back into her bag, zipped it shut, and sat upright. If this is a random check, please log it accordingly. But if this was requested by someone specific, I want the reason in writing. The room fell into silence. Outside, in the security camera control hub, Margaret Hensley sat slouched in a leather chair, one hand buried in a snack bag. She chewed slowly, eyes locked on the monitor displaying the interrogation room. No words, no blinking, just that lazy posture and a face full of quiet satisfaction. What she didn't know was that another wall-mounted camera, not connected to the internal system, had recorded everything from the condescending stares to the way Margaret sat back, watching another human being be humiliated like it was her afternoon entertainment. After nearly 20 minutes of being randomly screened, Amara walked out of the security room, holding a printed slip. No violation verified. She didn't look around, didn't hang her head, didn't slow her steps. She simply walked steadily toward the boarding gate. Margaret was still there, but said no apology. She just watched Amara pass by, like a liability that had slipped through her fingers. Amara handed her ticket to the gate agent. A soft green beep, valid. She stepped through the door into first class. The cabin air was colder than the AC, with cream leather seats, crystal glasses, and a faint trail of luxury perfume lingering. Not a single warm glance welcomed her. At seat 1C, Amara found her place. Beside her, in seat 1A, was a white man in his 50s, tailored suit, a faint scent of menthol tobacco clinging to his collar. He glanced at her as she pulled her carry-on overhead, said nothing, but his eyes said everything else. Amara took her seat. Not long after, a familiar figure appeared from the back of the cabin. Chief Flight Attendant Laura Hensley, Margaret's cousin. It wasn't hard to tell they shared the same eyes. Laura moved row by row, handing out hot towels, pouring champagne, until she reached Amara's row. Her steps slowed, her hand shifted the tray aside. Then she walked on, no towel, no greeting, not even a courteous nod. Amara wasn't surprised. She simply looked up for a beat, just long enough to remember one more face. The man beside her had just clicked his seatbelt, his lips curling into a smirk. His voice was low, not loud enough to be heard by others, but just loud enough for Amara to catch every word. Guess nowadays, anyone with money can squeeze into this world. Amara turned her head, not angry, not confrontational, just calmly asked, "You think money's all it takes to sit here?" The man froze, caught off guard by her response. Amara gave a faint smile, not bitter, just clear-eyed. "If it were that easy, do you think I'd still need money to get here?" No one replied, but Amara knew it wasn't a question that needed an answer. Laura returned, placing a glass of water on Amara's tray, without a word, no towel, no menu. Amara didn't complain, didn't ask why. She knew at this moment, any word would only be twisted by bias. So she sat still, gazing out the window. The plane hadn't moved yet, but somehow, Amara knew this flight was about to enter an airspace no one saw coming. The plane doors began to close. A few passengers were squeezing in last-minute emails, some checked their meeting schedules, others sipped champagne, lost in quiet luxury. Amara sat upright, hands resting gently on her lap, eyes forward. She could feel it, something was still waiting to happen. And then, as if triggered by some unseen signal, Laura Hensley appeared once again, standing before seat 1C. She leaned in slightly, speaking low but with the weight of a command. "Excuse me, ma'am, we need to ask you to move to the back row. There's been a last-minute adjustment to the front cabin's weight distribution." Amara didn't look up. She simply asked, soft but each word crisp and undeniable, "Am I heavier than everyone else in this cabin?" Laura flinched slightly, blinked, but quickly resumed her cool tone. "This isn't personal. We're just following safety protocol. Your cooperation is appreciated." "I understand," Amara replied. "And I'm also following standard internal procedure. So I'll ask again, why am I the only passenger being asked to move?" Laura dipped her head slightly, but her tone stayed firm. "We need you to relocate. We're not authorized to provide further explanation." The air grew thick. Nearby passengers began to glance over. A few pretended to read magazines, but their eyes were watching. Amara stared straight into Laura's eyes, not to challenge, but to make something unmistakably clear. She took a breath, reached calmly into her bag, pulled out her phone, opened the internal app, tapped a blue icon, and typed one single line. "Trial complete. Submit file code to corporate. Send." Not a word more. Laura still hadn't grasped what had just happened, but something in Amara's expression made her instinctively take half a step back. Amara placed the phone on her tray, looked at Laura one last time, and said, "If this airline truly has a weight problem, maybe it's not the passengers who need relocating." She smiled softly but deeply, the kind of smile that sticks in someone's throat. Laura froze, no reply. She turned sharply and walked back toward the galley. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away at the Horizon Group headquarters, a signal decrypted automatically. Level 2 trial complete. Initiate emergency personnel review. And at that moment, no one on the plane realized that the woman they tried to remove from her seat was the very person who held the power to decide who still had a seat on the next flight. The plane landed at 5:34 p.m., right on time. As passengers stood to retrieve their carry-ons, Amara remained seated, hands folded on her lap, eyes forward, as if the flight wasn't over yet. And as she suspected, it wasn't. 3 minutes after the cabin doors opened, a crew member in a navy blue uniform appeared at the front of the plane. He leaned in to whisper something to Chief Flight Attendant Laura. Laura nodded, then turned to Amara. "Ms. Thompson, please come with us. There's a security issue that needs clarification." No shouting, no handcuffs, just stares, curious, doubtful, whispering, sharp as glass. Amara stood, nodded slightly, no resistance. She was led into an internal investigation room at Crestview Airport, a small conference space, dark wood table, swivel chairs, electronic display present in the room. The head of security, a representative from Sky Vista Airlines, Chief Flight Attendant Laura Hensley, and an observer from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, were present. A printed report sat waiting on the table, labeled, "Incident Report. Passenger Amara Thompson, disruptive behavior and noncompliance following seat relocation request, safety grounds." Amara took her seat, opened her handbag, no rush. Everyone in the room waited, as if expecting her to react like someone accused. But she didn't. She simply pulled out a white envelope, sealed with a distinct red wax emblem, the tri-branch logo of Horizon Group. She placed it on the table, unsealed it slowly, and removed a single page, smooth premium stock with a faint silver border. Then, she looked each person in the eye and began to read. Amara Thompson, Senior Internal Audit Specialist, authorized by the Board of Mergers and Strategic Affairs, Horizon Group. I have been conducting a covert evaluation of Sky Vista Airlines Customer Experience Protocol, Audit Code 998. X. Scope. Discriminatory conduct. Mid to senior personnel level. Silence. No breathing, no shifting in chairs. The Sky Vista representative opened his mouth, but no words came out. Amara placed the paper on the table, pulled out her phone, and turned it to face the FAA observer. The entirety of my random screening at the boarding gate was recorded using a secondary camera network, including Supervisor Margaret Hensley's baseless command to intervene. This domestic flight was part of a Level 3 field trial, and today, Sky Vista has failed. Laura Hensley sat frozen. The words she had spoken on the flight, the cold seat reassignment, the empty gestures, the subtle disdain, now echoed like a silent verdict. The FAA observer gave a quiet nod. The Sky Vista rep slowly leaned back, sweat beading at his temples. The head of security spoke first. Ms. Thompson, we sincerely apologize for the mishandling you've endured. An internal investigation will begin immediately, and I assure you, Amara raised her hand gently. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to see if this system is brave enough to look itself in the mirror. Within 45 minutes of that meeting, an urgent email was dispatched to Sky Vista's executive board. Suspend merger negotiations. Internal ethics compliance audit failed. The woman they tried to escort out of the priority lane was the one holding the power to remove Sky Vista from the National Financial Rescue List altogether. The next day, Sky Vista Airlines received an official letter from the National Financial Merger Board. The $3.8 billion relief proposal would be reconsidered following the completion of an ethics training program designed by the complainant herself. And once again, Amara Thompson's name didn't need to appear because what she represented was already louder than any business card could ever be. The internal investigation wrapped up in less than 24 hours. Margaret was suspended indefinitely, stripped of her leadership role. Laura was permanently reassigned, no longer allowed to work first class. Every staff member involved was required to submit a full written report and complete a specialized training course personally designed by Amara. The media moved on. Public interest faded toward the next trending headline. But for those involved, the echo lingered. As for Amara, she gave no interviews, filed no lawsuits, requested no compensation. She sent just one email, which was posted on the airline's internal message board. I don't need an apology. I only hope they never do this to anyone else. That Saturday afternoon at Crestview International, the east hallway of the terminal was unusually quiet. Amara had just finished a private debrief. She stepped into the corridor, heading toward the exit, and there, by pure chance, she saw Margaret, the same woman who had once tried to push her out of the priority line, the one who sneered about reward points like they defined human worth. Now, bent over a desk at the emergency assistance counter, sorting papers quietly, her uniform had Changedno name badge, no executive suit, just a wrinkled light blue shirt and shoulders that now sat lower than Amara's own. Amara walked past without stopping, but then she turned back, not to gloat, not to humiliate, only to look one final time directly into the smallness of someone who had lost their own reflection. Margaret felt it. She slowly looked up, couldn't smile, couldn't speak. Amara pressed her lips together gently, not with contempt, not with pity, and simply said, "You were right. I don't look like someone who usually sits in first class. Because I didn't come here to sit. I came to see how many people in this place still know how to act like human beings." No further words. Amara turned and left behind a silence no one dared to break. No one expected that the woman turned away at the boarding gate would be the one to make an entire power structure bow its head. No shouting, no retaliation, just a silence that stood its ground and a gaze that never blinked. Amara didn't need to win. She only needed to make sure they'd never dare do that again to the next person in line. Because justice isn't always about setting everything right. Sometimes it's making those who once stepped on others walk on their own, in silence, with the weight of regret. Have you ever witnessed or felt what it's like to be dismissed just because of how you look? Have you ever chosen silence and wondered if it made you weak? Or maybe, that very silence became the strongest thing you've ever carried. Share your story in the comments below. You never know. It might inspire the next story we tell. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because stories of courage, justice, and quiet humanity are still waiting to be told. I'm your storyteller, and I'll see you in the next story that inspires.